Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Compliance Corner with John Hanson. Today is Thursday, May 14th, 2020. It is actually Red Day with Keller Williams, so it should be a phenomenal day today. So we'll start off with this, and then everyone's going to be going for our day of volunteering in our communities. And of course, I'm here with one of my dear, dear friends, Mr. John Hanson. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so today is a really interesting topic because it's all about the FERPTA certification. And what I want to go ahead and do is read just a little statement that you prepared for us. And basically says, there are potentially dire consequences if the Foreign Investment Real Property Act certificate, also known as the Form 22E FERPTA certification, is not used but not contractually required. A seller must declare citizenship on every transaction. Now, the reason we're talking about this today is because you actually held a forms class that you do on Wednesdays, and one of your students pointed something out to you. So can you actually walk us through that conversation?
Yeah, a part of the forms class that we covered yesterday was that FERPTA segment, and so as we were going through the FERPTA segment, one of our salespeople from the Kent office had brought up a question or made a comment about the FERPTA, because I had said that paragraph 14, where you check the box either seller is or is not a foreign person, is not, required to be checked, either of them. So you don't have to initiate that. You can just leave those blank. Because it's the only thing within all of our forms where if you don't check it, it still is an enforceable contract. And so he said something. He being this mystery man whose initials are Jake Alger, and he said that, well, that sounds like that maybe it's not a contractual requirement. Then it sounds like it may be, federal law, but not something, a contractual requirement to make our contract enforceable. And my eyes were opened, and I said, yeah, that sounds right to me too. So I thank him for that insight, because I was having a hard time over the years grappling with this thing that we were giving counsel on and so forth. And so I wanted to share that today. I wanted to share with you that line 14, where we check either seller is or is not a foreign person, doesn't have to be checked, but it should be, and it should be checked by the seller, because if the buyer's agent checks is not, which is usually going to be the case here, is not a foreign person, right?
Right.
Then later the seller could say, well, I never made that representation. I didn't check that box. Someone checked it for me, apparently. And so there could be that argument made, you see. So it usually doesn't cause a problem, but the consequences of this thing are dire. So we want to make sure we're protecting our buyers in these situations, because if a person who is a foreigner or is not paying taxes, even if they're a foreigner but they're paying taxes here in the United States, then you would check is. But if they are not, but they don't check that, or they don't provide that Form 22E, and we need to facilitate providing that 22E also as a step in just making sure we're not forgetting this thing. Because if we forget this thing, these consequences are dire. And so when I say dire, it's because the seller is responsible for a minimum of 10% of the sales price. So I'm not talking about of the gain, I'm talking about the sales price. So if we're talking about a $1.3 million property, the seller's responsible for the tax. If they're not a US citizen, then they're responsible for 10% of that amount. And if they don't pay it, the IRS is going to go after the buyer, because they're going to put a lien on the buyer's new property. for that amount, and they have
Wow.
the right to do that. So the law that was passed allowing the IRS to do this is what we're concerned about. And the IRS, anytime they need money, which is always, is going to pursue those kinds of things so that they can collect as much as they can. So we want to protect our buyers from being vulnerable to that kind of thing. And the declaration, the seller's official declaration, which in the past has been used in escrows, but escrows are being counseled to not be involved in that. So we've got to make sure when we're representing the buyer that the seller has made their declaration, at the very least on that form 22E. And so even though that may or may not be written into the contract, it needs to at some point come forward and have the seller make that declaration. And you need to be your buyer's savior to make sure that it is being done appropriately and on file.
That is fascinating, John. Okay, well, thank you so much for clearing this up for us. And I totally understand now why you were saying it is dire. So, okay, everybody, as always, heed John's advice. He is a wise, wise man. Okay, John, I hope you have a fantastic day. I know we're going to have a fantastic Red Day, and I will see you next week, my friend. Have a great rest of your week.
Okay, you too. Thanks.